Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me well? Yes, I'm assuming. If you want to take your seat. Welcome to this panel. This panel is appropriately titled Changing Narratives. In our history, we had many historical figures that have fundamentally changed narratives in their industries through their body of work. In the process, they have also incredibly contributed to our humanity. To name a few of these narrative game changers, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, Henry Kissinger, a diplomat, a political scientist, and a former US Secretary of State, Gloria Estefan, the American singer and songwriter, Bob Marley, do I need to introduce him? Anish Kapoor, a painter and the winner of the 1991 Turner Prize, Wyclef Jean, another musician, former member of the Fugees, Marc Chagall, artist and painter, Albert Einstein, Freddie Mercury, frontman of the rock band Queen, and the late, and I'd like to pay homage to her, Madeleine Albright, former US Secretary of State. All these admirable people have a few things in common. I'm guessing drive, determination, inspiration, and all of them were once refugees. That very status today, is the topic of many discussions. And in fact, when we speak of narratives and words related to that status, there's actually 6 ways of defining refugees and displaced people today. I'm not going to rhyme them off. But with this panel, we wanted to go beyond the definition and beyond the word to give you a personal encounter with these heroes and their journey. That's how I think you will want to define them at the end of this panel. And to start, I'm so honored to welcome one of these heroes, Kim Thuy, who arrived this morning from my beloved home of Canada. Kim, welcome.
So I still smell like a plane.
Yes.
I'm fine.
Yes.
Just got off.
That's fine. When we were preparing for this panel, you told me so many things. Actually, I must say that while I was preparing for this panel, it was the most moving exchanges that I've had, and particularly with you, the way you describe so poetically your story and how you continue to change the narrative. Maybe you can introduce yourself to our audience.
I come from Vietnam, and I was born during the war, and we left Vietnam after the war. The war ended in 1975, and we left in 1978 as boat people because it was no longer possible to leave Vietnam. So you have to flee. Luckily, Vietnam is surrounded with water, so we could leave by fishing boats, basically. And we were very lucky that our little boat of 10 meters long, and we were 218 people on that boat. After 4 days, we arrived in Malaysia, and we stayed in that camp, refugees camp, for a couple of months, and we were lucky enough to be accepted by Canada. And there's one picture of us. We're lucky because not all of us had a picture of us as refugees in the camp. And we were the 13 of us standing in front of kind of a hut, but it was not really a hut. It was just a place where we slept, and a small little place, and we shared it with 2 other families. And I remember that day we had to dress up, and we didn't have any clothes on us, right? We didn't leave with bags or anything. So we tried to look good, and the 13 of us was smiling to the camera. But strangely enough, I watched that picture. I look at that picture very often because if you look at us, you don't see anything. There's nothing in our eyes. There was absolutely nothing. And now that I look back, I think I know why there was nothing. It's that, you know, when you flee a country, you basically leave your past. You leave your identity. We couldn't have any papers on us because it was difficult if we get caught. We got caught, and so on and so forth. So you don't have a past, but then you don't have a future yet because you don't know where you're going to go, where you're going to land, and you don't have a present because you don't know why you're going to wake up in the morning. You don't go to school, you don't know when you're going to eat, and so on and so forth. So you don't have, you're outside of the timeline, but you're also outside of space because you're in a no man's land, right? And I still wonder today how Canada, how these three agents, took us or selected us as as refugees to go to Canada, and uh, the and so I thought about it and I said, maybe it had to be a bet, because you don't know what these refugees will become or could become anything. And even today, knowing what we have become, one of us is an architect, a computer science, a doctor, a dentist, or a lawyer like me, or who has now become a writer. But so all kinds of professions, and but you couldn't tell. So I think the changing narratives here that I'm suggesting, and when we were discussing, is that I think we should allow the voices who have doubts about refugees, because it's true. We look like a tree in the winter. Not maybe in Paris, but in Canada. The trees in winter in Canada, you think they're dead. They're all dry, no leaves, nothing. And you never believe that they can grow grow back in the spring. And so refugees, I think, look like that when we are found in a refugee camp. And so it's a bet for a country to select a refugee. And so we should allow the voices of those who have hesitation, instead of condemning them right away, that they lack of empathy, or they're not generous enough, or they're racist, and so on and so forth. So I think we should open that conversation so that we can talk, we can have an exchange, and for the refugees to explain, that most of the refugees who have survived and arrived in the camp, it's that they have survived the sea, they have survived the road, the distance, the borders, the police, and so on and so forth. So you basically have only superhumans who have survived and arrived in the camp.
Heroes.
I don't know if heroes, but they like
heroes.
athletes, And I will tell you, I was born with so many allergies. I couldn't eat fish, eggs, milk. The wind would make me swell up, and same thing with the cold. And cold in Vietnam was 20 degrees, right? And I would swell up, and now I live in a country where it goes down to minus 20, and there's no problem. Funny enough, after the 4 days on the sea, I arrived in Malaysia, and I lost all of the allergies.
Wow.
So, or you die, or you become superhuman. And so I think for a country to make a bet on a refugee, most of the time, I think 95% of the time, that tree will grow back if you put that back in soil, and it will give. Of course, you don't know in advance if it will be, apples, oranges, or carrots that you get, but I think 95% of the time, you get something out of that dry tree that
and
you
see. Brought so much to Canada. You were once a lawyer, you are a restaurateur, and now you're a writer. You kept bringing so much and contributing. Your leaves have grown exponentially. But one of the things, while we were preparing, before you get onto the three major things that you brought to the industry in Canada through your work, one of the stories that really touched me is the story of the mirror, when you spoke of. Maybe you can share that story.
When we first arrived in Canada, we were the first group of refugees arriving in this city, about 1 hour from Montreal. So it was a smaller city, and it was March, so it was still very cold for a tropical girl that I was, and we didn't have proper clothing. So when we arrived, the door of the bus opened. And in front of us, it was, my feeling was that the whole city was in front of us waiting for us. And we stepped down, and the first shock was that they took us into their arms right away. And that was very foreign to an Asian girl that back then, to have people expressing their emotions so openly and so physically. And then the second shock, I would tell you, was that we were we had infection all over us, and because of the mosquito bites and so on and so forth, and we didn't have access to water, maybe 1 liter a day, to for drinking, washing, and so on and so forth. So the bites became, got infected very quickly. We had lice in our hair. We had chronic diarrhea, but these people didn't hesitate for 1 second to take us into their arms. And we were disgusting, and at 53, I'm not sure that I would take the 10-year-old Kim. I'm not sure I have the same purity or the same generosity than these people. But the most shocking part was that in the camp, of course, if you don't have electricity and water, you don't have a mirror. Right? So the first time I saw myself again was not in a mirror, but in the way that they looked at us. And I would tell you that I had never seen myself as beautiful as that moment, and I've never seen myself as beautiful again, because I've lost the vulnerability and the fragility of a refugee. And that moment defined the citizen I've become. I didn't wait for the papers to become a Canadian. I became a Canadian right at that moment, and I fell in love with those people, and because they spoke French from Quebec. So to me, French became my language of love, my second mother tongue, because it was the moment where I was born a second time. And but there's a documentary about our arrival. Back then, of course, we didn't understand what was going on with all those cameras, but I had the chance to see it 30 years later. And then you hear the mayor, the school teachers, everybody being interviewed, and they said, we don't know what we're going to do with these refugees. We don't know what they can eat or don't eat, or how they're going to live, how they're going to survive, what kind of jobs they could do. And they had so many doubts and fears about us. But they went beyond that, and they said, we're going to embrace them anyway, even though we don't know what we're going to do with them. And I think that's maybe back in the 70s, and back then there was something very innocent in Canada, because we were the first big group arriving in this small city. So there was that candor. That's how you say it? Candor. Candor to express really their doubts. And today, I think we don't allow that kind of conversation or that kind of declaration,
Yes. So do you feel that that should be part of like how we change the narrative about refugees? Because this is the purpose of this panel. Refugees are politicized sometimes. Refugees are ostracized other times. And we wanted to celebrate them.
Yes, yes.
So
and
how do you do that? How do you go about that when you want to change the narrative to go from politicized to ostracized to celebrate it? Because I want to celebrate you. Not because
I want
I'm
to celebrate the people who took the bet,
Yes, yes.
who betted on us, because it was not obvious and it was not easy. And I think that we should really encourage people to say, okay, what are your doubts? Why do you hesitate? Why are you scared? Are you scared because, the 13 of us, we didn't have anything. We lost everything. And you would never believe that 40 years later, the common fortune of these 13 people is somewhere $30 million today. And there are two ways of looking at it, as a country. You can say, oh, these 13 people have stolen $30 million from our country. Or you can say these 13 people have created $30 million for our country. And the danger here is that both explanations seem to be very logical, right?
Yes, yes.
And that's why we need to hear them, so that we can answer and can share the stories that, they are superhumans. If you take them, they're gonna make your country really stronger. And I'm married to a Quebecer from an even smaller city, further north, 5 hours north of Montreal, and because they were very far, they didn't have interaction with many other people. So I believe that I have brought in, genes that would get that got the community a little bit stronger, that can fight back diseases and so on and so forth. And so I think we should open up that conversation instead of condemnation, and maybe tell share this quotation from an American poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "Do the thing we fear, and death of fear is certain." And so I think we should talk about fear.
Yes.
And we should talk about hesitation. So not only hearing the stories from the refugee side, but also from the other side, from the people who are not so informed and
so
keen and open.
But I have a question for you. As you were speaking, I thought about it. And did you feel, because you've had 3 massive careers, you were a very successful lawyer, then you were a very successful restaurateur, and now you're a very successful writer. So success is part of your journey. But did you feel like you had to compensate or participate to the economy of the country or the art of the country because you were a refugee? Is that
No, I think it's the fascination of the freedom of our country, where you can reinvent yourself as many times as you want. I didn't know how to cook. But then if you want to open a restaurant in Quebec, you just open a restaurant. And because I didn't know how to cook, there was only 1 meal a day at my restaurant. You cannot choose. That's all I could do, on that day. And the customers at first, they congratulated me saying, "Oh, you have a new concept, with no menu." And I said, "No, it's not a concept. It's a handicap. I cannot do more, right?" And where can you do that, going from...
in Canada. You can do that,
and then you can become a lawyer even though you don't master so well French and English or whatever. You just start and I don't even know why they accepted me, in law school, but they did. And then I became a lawyer somehow. And then, writing, I didn't know that it was possible at all, for the immigrant that I was and still am, because I still don't master French well enough. I would make stupid mistakes like gender. I don't have féminin, masculin. Because in Vietnamese, we don't have gender for words. And so I would make mistakes like catastrophe is feminine, but in my mind it's always masculine, somehow. Catastrophe is masculine, and then I'll make that mistake over and over again. So how can you expect a writer to not know the gender of the word catastrophe, right? But it's the only place on earth, I think. Now, this is why I love my country so much, is that you have the freedom to reinvent yourself. So it's not overcompensating, is making use of the freedom of this country.
That's right.
It gives you, and also probably because there were so many refugees who died, of course, during these trips. And so somehow I think that I do feel that I have to live all the lives that didn't have the chance to live.
You had the life of the restaurateur that died, the life of the writer that died, and the life of the lawyer that died.
So I try to not waste any of the minutes that we get from this life, and also I try to not waste all the freedom that our country can provide us. And I think France does provide the same kind of freedom. There are not so many countries in the world
that can do that. And it's what a beautiful place to talk about this.
Yes, and so no, it's not overcompensating. It's to me, because there's an expression, right, when you say the glass is half full or half empty, and I never know which one is negative. Because to me, both are positive, right?
That's right, there's water.
Yeah.
You got water in the glass.
If it's half full, you still have space to get some more. If it's half empty, because you have already taken in, half of it. And then I realized why I cannot see, I am confused with this notion. It's because I do see life as Niagara Falls.
Yeah, that's right.
There's so much water coming down. I only have one glass, and so it's always overflowing. So this is what I think of our country.
So true.
Yeah, and once that we have a chance to survive, and that's why I think I have this patience, probably,
Good.
to talk to people who are not so open to refugees,
Mm-hmm.
and to basically reassure them that if you give enough time, a little bit of water, soil, and then we'll grow back. And so, I'm basically the guinea pig.
Yes.
Yeah,
Cobaye. Mm-hmm.
in that if you take a refugee from a camp, 43 years later, this is what
What you
it
get.
becomes. Yeah, and I'm the least.
Just add water.
Yeah,
Just
add water, and that's all. I'll be happy. And the thing is that I'm not the most useful refugee of the group. The rest of them are doctors or dentists or architects, so they contribute to
Yes.
society for real. Whereas I only enjoy, going to places and
Yes.
talk and write and.
But you write beautifully, and you bring poetry to some dark topics or difficult topics.
Yeah. So yeah, and talking about fear, and so I think we should start this conversation with those who are not so keen,
Yes.
like you said. So that's the change that I'm trying to bring. So of course, I think most of us here are already in the same. Narrative or the same position, but I always try to go to places where they don't want me.
You're
Or they-
wanted here. You're wanted here.
yeah. So most of the time, yeah, I try to knock on doors which are not, are not open yet.
But so what would be, it's very interesting that you bring that up because when we discussed how to prepare this and you mentioned like we should also embrace the fear of the people that just don't feel comfortable with the concept of refugees. And I think it's a very important point because the refugee crisis is not going anywhere. It's going to keep growing and it's a topic that we've approached over the years at ChangeNOW, also with Allon Lefebvre, who is
Yep.
in the audience, who handles the film festival, and we've tried to address it through different films. One film a few years ago, a short film where we were discussing this and how we have political refugees, but the climate refugees is a
Absolutely.
growing concern. So having this type of narrative and saying, well, okay, I want to understand why you're afraid of this person coming in, because that's going to be, I don't want to use the new normal because we've overheard it over the
Yeah.
past few years, but
It will continue, and most of the time, when I talk to younger people or refugees who are trying to apply for a job, I say, when you go in and they ask you, why would we hire you? And I said, just tell them the story of the goldfish. Because the goldfish, in English we call it goldfish, but in French it's poisson rouge, right? So it's red. And the Vietnamese, we call it the Chinese fish. Because I think because the Vietnamese, we are all the same color. So we never define ourselves as, oh, I'm blonde or I have green eyes, or we're just brown and dark brown, darker
Yes.
brown. And maybe that's why we go to the origin of the fish to describe the fish instead of the color. And then I didn't know why we didn't see the same color. We should have the same eyes. And I went to an animal place with fish, and I look at the fish. And if you look at the fish from from the head to the tail, on that side of the scale, it's red. If you look at the fish from the tail to the head, the other side is gold, right? And I think this is why we call them differently, gold and red, gold and rouge. And I said, you tell that to the employer. You say, if you bring different people from different cultures, from different places in the world, you will understand the problem you have on the table better. Because if you have three visions, we understand the fish already better. We can describe the fish with more details than if we only have one perspective. Right?
That's right.
So this is what refugees will bring to the table. And so if you have, not refugees, but people from other places, diversity, in ages, experience, and so on, so all diversity. And so I said, if you have a problem in the middle of the table and we have to solve this, you have three angles to look at the problem. And most of the time, you not only get three solutions, but you get 9 solutions, because the conversation will bring an exponential power to the discussion. And so Yeah, when people have that, you just tell the story of the goldfish, and it should work.
Such a good story. Such a good story. I want to thank you for sharing all of that you just shared with us. I never thought that I would be speaking in behind the Eiffel Tower behind me
I
with
know,
another
this is
Canadian about
amazing.
the refugee crisis. So thank you for sharing the stage with
But
me.
there's one
Yes,
quote.
you have to share the quote with us. I was going to just invite you to do that.
Yeah.
Because throughout your thing, I don't feel like you're a refugee advocate or ambassador, although you are. I feel like you're an ambassador for humanity, and you have a great quote about optimism that you wanted to share with the audience.
Yes, optimism and kindness. You know, when we talked about refugees, it's almost hard to talk about optimism because the problem is so huge and deep and grave. How do you say that? Serious, right? But I think we have to choose optimism, and I will read to you a quote from Guillermo del Toro. Yes, I know you don't think that he would say things with shirts. Well, no. He's a very interesting man. So he has said that optimism is not uncool. Optimism is rebellious and daring and vital. Optimism is radical. It is a hard choice, the brave choice, the choice to declare what needs to be in the face of what is. So I think we need to approach this matter, this issue, with optimism and allowed ourselves, given ourselves the freedom to be optimistic and to look forward.
Freedom to be optimistic.
Yes.
Thank
so
you so much,
let's choose
Kim.
optimism.
Always. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
You're good. We're going to continue to try to change narratives, and I would like to welcome on stage 3 wonderful people. Karam Hassan, please, can you join me on stage? The president of La Voix des Réfugiés Foundation and project leader, communication and corporate social and environmental responsibility at L'Oréal Foundation. Monsieur Allon Zeitoun, CEO of Naturalia. And Fanny Pringent, co-founder of each one. Thank you, all of you, for being here with me today. Again, it was such an interesting panel to prepare because it was so inspiring, really in the proper sense of the term. I know it's overused as well today, but also it was very moving. When you and I, Karam, were preparing, I actually teared up because your message was so powerful. So maybe you can introduce yourself and your story.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy, so glad to be here today. And I think it's very important, to talk about this issue because we should change the world by telling people our stories and the initiative of a lot of organisms. My name is Karam. I'm from Sudan. I was born in Darfur, a region that had a lot of genocide for over 10 years. In 2007, we forced to leave our region to go to Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. And since there, I have completed my education and have done relations public and media for 3 years at the university. And after that, I got the chance to go to India. And when I was there, I was so happy to be there, first of all. And after that, I have the freedom of speech. So I founded, with my friends, an association to do some manifestation to say that in Sudan, in Darfur especially, a lot of people are suffering. So we are doing this for almost a few years, 3 years. And when I got back to Sudan after 3 years, I was arrested at the airport because there is some people that my friends, unfortunately, saying that I'm against the government. So I was in the detention for few weeks, and after that, I got the freedom. I decided to, to leave my country because it was difficult for me to live there. I didn't have freedom, and they wanted to arrest me again. So I took the boat from Egypt, from Alexandria, and I came to Europe by sea. After that, I came to Sicily. It was in 2015. After that, I came to Ventimiglia, Paris, Calais. In this place, because I wanted to go to England. I was trying for almost 3 months, but I didn't achieve, so I decided to be in France for 3 reasons. First of all, I lost my friend. My friend, he was trying to, to cross the channel for go to England. He didn't achieve that. And I lost him. And the second reason, it is that I fell in love with French language and French culture. And today I can say that I love French as much as I love Sudan, really. So there is a lot of things that to say, but I think we can come back again.
Expand, for sure, for sure. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story. Actually, I discovered recently that Sudan used to be the biggest country in Africa in size.
Yes.
And then it was split in 2 through the war. And that division created so much turmoil.
Yes, in 2011, because in Sudan there is a lot of diversity, but unfortunately we didn't this diversity is, government has made a lot of war, and we're so sad because we have a lot of diversity, and even I think few years ago, Darfur wanted to be to be divided, but we are trying to speak with the government, to make things, because we want to be there and live with this diversity.
Yes.
But
it was hard.
Yeah.
And I learned that from my dad, who's in the audience. So merci, papa. Merci, papa. I would like to jump onto you, Fanny, and to get onto your program and what you've created and your story, because you also have a very interesting story that did not start in France either.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today to discuss such an important topic. So to answer about who I am, it's true that I grew up in French Guyana, still France, but it's a very unique and culturally diverse environment. So my classmates, they came from very diverse backgrounds and countries, and a lot of them were probably brought there because they were seeking refuge. But that's not even a topic we were talking about. What we were talking about were our math grades, our friends, and our dreams. So I only realized that it was that the world referred to them as refugees when I arrived in France métropolitaine.
Yes, of course. I'm saying France hexagonale.
And this is where I was actually shocked, because I discovered a completely different reality about how multiculturalism is dealt with here. And I actually realized then how my upbringing really shaped my vision of what I aspire the society should be. So it was quite evident creating and co-founding each one, because it's actually what I've been
called to do. It was your purpose. And so maybe you can tell us what each one does.
Yeah, so each one is an impact-driven company, and on one hand, we reveal the talents, skills, potential of refugees through training and recruiting and recruitment solutions, And on the other hand, and that's very important, we help companies see that talent by moving them into those same recruitment solutions that can actually engage their employees.
And Karam was actually one of the beneficiaries of your program.
Yeah, we actually met a very long time ago. He was working with L'Oréal, but we actually work with a lot of corporates, 20 of them, Naturalia here, of course, but also BNP, IKEA. So we have a very diverse type of companies working with us today and being very committed to changing the system.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get back to you with more questions. You're not done. And Allon Zeitoun, CEO of Naturalia, who is also an important part of this panel because you're all in correlation and you all intersect at some point of the journey of the solution that you're trying to bring up. And when we were preparing for the panel as well, you brought something really interesting, is that at first you thought it was a good idea, and then you realized that welcoming refugees into your company was a great idea, not just a good idea. Maybe you can tell us.
Yes. So at first, when each one approached us, we said, okay, yes, we're going to do it, but it was about charity. Charity first because I'm French, I grew up in a not so exotic place as Guyane, actually in the eastern suburb of Paris. Most of us were second or third generation immigrants, maybe 95%. And we all grew up with this idea that you are French when you live in France and you share our values, the French values, the eternal friends. And we strongly believe that we need to keep this flame. Some don't, but we do. And actually, I agree with Kim that we need to discuss with them. So we need to keep this. And actually, Naturalia is a big corp company. Diversity is one of our core values. We have like 48, I think, nationalities among our people. So yes, we said yes. It's going to be 10 people or 15 people. We're going to put them in the stores and it's going to be okay. And actually, it's not what happened. Actually, they are really great workers. You can see that at the first step. When you interview them, they are much more prepared, much more intense, much more engaged than a normal or a standard person that would postulate to come to Naturalia. And when they come into the store, they have, let's say, your story is a sad story. They all have sad stories. No migrant has a story that is not even close to nice. It's really horrible stories. But you don't see that. What you see is someone that is really smart. Actually, they are really smart. We have among the 10 first people that enter Naturalia, we have one teacher, we have one physician, we have a lot of pretty skilled people. They are smiling, they are really engaged, and they are only very good at what they are doing. They are improving the team. They are improving the team because, for example, the store manager has a new purpose. He feels that he needs to integrate this person into his store, into the French society, and he gives him more energy. So it brings a very positive energy in the whole team. So yes, at the beginning, I think it was a good idea, just to make kind of charity, but actually it's very good for business. Very, very good for business. So we're amplifying a lot our collaboration with each one in the next few months.
So in changing the narratives, we have like the perfect trio here. And maybe, because you're a key component of this trio, maybe you can invite in our audience and for the people that will listen to this panel after, maybe you can invite your peers, people who are head of companies, to do the same thing as you.
I won't, because I need them into my company. No, but actually you are completely right. It's very good.
Just do it. Just tell them. Just do it.
Just do it. But it's also because we are facing now in France an employment rate that is declining. That is a very good thing, but we are missing workforce. So for us, migrants may be a solution to an issue that we have. So it's key for the country, not only for companies, but for the country.
Absolutely. And Fanny?
Yeah, I think what is key about what you're saying are two things. So two things. First, of course, we need to change narratives about refugees themselves. We need to stop talking about exile and sadness and also the figures and statistics that are very depressing. They do move us, but they don't mobilize us. They don't help building long-term longitudinal solutions. And what you're also saying is how you've moved from a philanthropic approach to an approach that is creating value. And creating value for businesses is actually how we are going to engage them in building the solutions for tomorrow. So I think that addressing the business needs, addressing the recruitment needs, addressing the brand needs of social impact, addressing how you retain and engage your current employees is how we will be able to actually change the system. Not only change narratives, but also change the system and find solutions that can bring change at scale, a very systemic change.
And actually, I want to go back to what you said yesterday when we were preparing. Allon, you mentioned that there was a scarcity of employees for certain jobs, and you mentioned that there was actually a way to create job opportunity, or that there was a wide opportunity in terms of hiring refugees. And you mentioned it within your conversation, but maybe there's something also that you can share with the potential listeners that are thinking or debating. It's like, oh, well, what kind of program is that and how can I be part of it? But it's also very easy to implement. It wasn't a hard thing to do.
Yes, it was very easy. Actually, each one is providing all the sourcing. So they are providing you with very qualified people. I think we interviewed about 15 people, and 10 of them are actually in the stores right now. And they remain in the stores because we have a high turnover usually in the first months at our companies. So it's very efficient. It's very easy, very efficient. And in one day, I think we recruited about 10 people. So very efficient, very easy. I won't tell you about the cost because it's still in discussion. It's normal.
Negotiations happening. There's a negotiation is happening.
Exactly. No, but it's really amazing. It's really an amazing solution, and I forgot what I wanted to say, but it will come back.
It will come back. Maybe, Karam, you can go back, because one of the things you mentioned when we were preparing, I mean, obviously, when I heard your story, you were even more poetic in the way you described it. It was really moving. But you said that you feel like L'Oréal, who has welcomed you, feels like a family to you, because you found, I want to use that word, refuge, professionally, but you also felt, maybe I want to go there. Maybe you felt more welcome than a regular employee?
I cannot say that, but what I say that maybe I will just I will start with saying that when you are a refugee, like you don't choose to leave your country, like you don't leave by choice, and when you come in the country, sometimes you're forced to do all you need to prove you prove that to have your place. I love like my team in the foundation. I think because the hospitality which I got, it's really exceptional. And even in France, I met great people such amazing people who are so open-minded, who are so great people. So in Calais, in Paris, in my team, I think the hospitality, through this hospitality, they welcomed me, and I think even I'm so motivated and I love my job. And I was saying that later on, if you woke up in the morning to go to job, and you are going with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy, this is the good way to say that I love my work. So I love what I do because it's amazing.
Beautiful.
Can I remember. Thanks.
You remember, yeah.
The point, here on the not the backstage, but on the down floor, a lot of solutions they come into essentially about the carbon footprint and how you can increase the biodiversity or reduce carbon footprint. It comes against other company objectives, and it's why it's difficult to implement it because. You need to invest time, you need to invest money, it can reduce your profits, so it's why it's very difficult to implement. And the solutions that are not win-win, actually it's very difficult to implement them. The incredible things about each one, it's really win-win. Because it solves a lot of issues that you have. We have an issue of recruiting people, motivated people, and we have an issue in motivating the people that are already in the stores, that need to have a purpose. And it provides a solution to those three solutions. So that's why it's really an amazing solution, because it's really win-win. And actually, the social impact, I don't say that we don't give a damn, but actually, it doesn't need to be. It's really a solution for us. And that's why I think it will succeed.
I'm not going to present each one anymore. I'm just going to send you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I think it's actually how we are able to create long-term solutions, not only short-term. And we really need, we were talking earlier about how we need to move from aid and support and help to actually finding the right solution in volumes, because the numbers of the issue are quite important. And I think that's how we will engage corporates.
Absolutely. There's so many. I have two questions for you, Fanny. The first, well, one mention and one question. But there's so many programs that are trying to be developed or are in development or do exist. I mean, there's one with a person in the audience, Jean-Baptiste Andréani, president from IFA School, who has a great project with fashion and migration. There's obviously all that you do and how you implement it and intervene in the process. But there's something that really stayed with me when we were exchanging with Maureen, your head of communication, who's also in the audience. She mentioned that there's I loved the story. Maybe you can share it with us, where you've had a luxury house in France, which we can't name, that hired a refugee and just sort of piloted the idea. And they were so impressed by all that he was doing and the rendement, I mean, the delivery and the amount of success that he was giving through his work, that they were like, well, we want all of our employees to be like this guy. And so what is the way that you use, or what are the tools that you use to convince? I mean, obviously, Allon has a sensitivity to the topic and you've experienced it, so you're already convinced. But what do you do for the companies or the leaders of companies that are not yet comfortable and that maybe have what Kim mentioned, to weave it in, that still have that fear, like, oh, what am I going to do with this person in my company?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that example of Thuy you're mentioning, because when I met him, he was actually he had been struggling to find a job for the past 2 years, and he was applying to a random opportunity that we had. And when I met him, I actually saw the immense potential, but he's one example out of thousands. He had the motivation, he had the energy, he had the soft skill, he had learned French on its own in 1 year. And he did study engineering, stopped his studies because of migration, and was passionate about luxury and fashion. And so, of course, we connected him, because that's what each one does, with a luxury brand. And he became one of the top performers of the Champs-Élysées counseling role that he had in 6 months. And he was offered a job as manager and entered their career path. But that's, of course, that's interesting. But when we met him, we knew he would have such a successful career path. What we were looking for was actually the change of perception in the human resources mind and in the manager's mind. Because when we talk about changing narrative, and Kim Thuy said it perfectly, it's bringing the host community and bringing in those who can have a role in the future and those who can have a strong role to play in the future are companies, businesses, and their employees. So changing their perception is key to changing integration of refugees.
So in closing, because we only have a few seconds, but I think it would be good to go back to it, and we'll see who was listening. But at the beginning of our talk, I mentioned that I was not going to name all the narratives and the words that we have to define their status, but maybe I'm going to give you 3 definitions, and maybe you can give me a counter word that's more positive. Displaced person. What would you say instead? Another word that relates to the crisis. It could be anything.
I would actually talk about talents.
Talent, great. Apatride? Apatride? What word would you say to counter this?
No, I don't have any other words to this word. It's perceived. It's perceived as a negative one in English.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's just a status.
Okay.
It's not an issue.
Yeah, just a status. Great. And then exile. What would you use to counter?
I can say I was saying that I was born in Darfur, but I was born in second time.
Rebirth.
In France, when I started loving this language, this country, and that's why I founded my association, which we call the Voice of the Refugee, La Voix des Réfugiés, to help refugees to integrate in this beautiful country and to make their new home. So,
rebirth. Okay,
yes.
That's a beautiful word to close it with. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. Thank you. And now, to continue, I'd like to welcome one more person on stage with me, Mursal Hedayat. Will you please join me? Hi, Mursal. How are you?
So inspired. I mean, I think that one thing the refugees have going for them is their storytelling, their ability to persuade, change minds. And I think just sitting here and listening to so many inspiring people, it was very touching.
Super touching. I'm so happy to have you here with us today. You're the founder and CEO of Chatterbox. You're coming from London today, so thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
And you, with your project, you help refugees integrate by learning a new language?
No, the opposite actually. So as Allon said, I think that solutions that work, that kind of scale and have a big impact, tend to work within whatever structures or systems we have in place in the world. And what Chatterbox seeks to find are opportunities where business interests are aligned with refugees' interests. And one of them is the fact that businesses increasingly want and need language education. In France, English is our biggest language for obvious reasons, but elsewhere, a lot of people are learning French. I mean, business is going global, English is the lingua franca. And so what we've done is to build technology that lets refugees unlock their language skills as an income source, as a job, as a step back into work after sometimes quite long periods of unemployment.
So you're like a cooler version of the Rosetta Stone.
We are Rosetta Stone for the conscious capitalism age.
Perfect. I love that definition. And when we were preparing also, I was really moved by your story because maybe you can tell us more, but you came from Afghanistan with your mom as a refugee, and you were kind of surprised to see how the level of talent and the level of skills that your mom had, and maybe you can tell us what she was doing, and how she couldn't find work while she was incredibly skilled in her field.
Yeah, I sort of grew up not realizing I was a refugee. For me, it was really normal to know former lawyers and former doctors who were unemployed or working as kind of cleaners. I just thought that was really normal. And it wasn't until I graduated from my degree in economics that I realized, 20-something-year-old me who had no professional experience, didn't know anything about the world of work, didn't have any marketable skills really, that I was sought after by employers. Employers were fighting to get me to apply for their postgraduate programs and so on. But my mum, who was a civil engineer, graduated as one of 4 women in her year at Kabul University, represented Afghanistan in the UN Women's Conference in 1991. She was unemployed, and no one would look at her CV. And so that just made me realize that the way things are, the ways that we oppress refugees when they arrive in our countries is not logical. I mean, it doesn't make sense to put an engineer out of work, especially in today's economy. And so when I graduated, I think I identified the huge social impact and economic opportunity in just kind of getting people to back off from refugees, let them thrive, give them the same chance and opportunity that I had when I graduated, and no more. That's all they need.
I just thought of something. It would probably be the more efficient way to learn a new language if you're learning it from somebody that comes, like, sometimes you learn languages. I mean, I remember being smaller, sometimes we would learn language from somebody that had learned the language themselves and then would teach it. Here you're learning it from somebody that's really, and maybe from a pocket of the world where you have a very specific way of speaking and you want to learn, like you're just really expanding into a craft that's very specific. And so how does that work? Like what type of clients do you have that use Chatterbox? Who's the profile of the person using your services?
So they're huge multinational companies like BNP Paribas, the Red Cross, Unilever, PwC, McKinsey, I could go on. So actually, I think the key is that we didn't rely on our social impact brand as being the reason that people want to use Chatterbox as a language learning solution. Help a refugee, 1% of the population can really get behind that today, I'd say. The rest will be saying, why? And the why behind Chatterbox is that, our coaches come from amazing backgrounds. We have teachers on the platform who are actresses, academics, scientists, dentists, teachers from so many different backgrounds. And the way that we've designed the learning, you find a coach who shares your professional backgrounds and interests. So someone who was recently studying with us is the head of science at DFID, the Department for International Development in the UK. And she was studying from a Congolese medical doctor, French. And so these kind of matches you don't find on Rosetta Stone, so we have a little bit of an advantage there.
And it's a question I wanted to ask Karam as well, and Kim as well. But I wonder how do you, so when you're a refugee, you leave your land. I mean, as Karam beautifully said, it is a rebirth. How do you identify and how do you connect with that place of birth now? It's a big question, sorry.
It was one actually that I was talking about just yesterday with an Iranian refugee. Refugees stick together. I think there's an experience that you share that kind of bonds you. And one thing, for example, Karam's doing is using his new privileged position to, for example, teach the French language to newcomers to France. But so I was talking to this other refugee, and we were sharing how growing up, we were so ashamed of our backgrounds, actually. We felt like the culture, whatever it was that made us Afghan was the reason we had to leave. So how could it be valuable? And actually, it's that first step towards recognizing the value of your culture is the first step that you take towards going back and loving your country, I think, especially as being a child refugee. And that's why, Chatterbox, for, the people who become coaches with us, sometimes they've only been a refugee for 6 months, really early in the journey, we get in touch with them. And that difference of, me spending 20 years, very embarrassed I was Afghan, and only at the age of, in my 30s, realizing what a richness there is to my culture, to my language, to my food. you know, for hopefully for others, it'll be much quicker to realize what an asset their culture is for them, how they can monetize that for themselves, how they can share it with their communities, food, as Kim did. So many, you know, so much of our heritage and our human capital we bring with us when we are forced to leave home. And that can be tapped into, and that's Chatterbox's business model.
To view it as, in changing the narrative, to view it as a gift, that you're bringing something as a gift.
Exactly. I remember really in the early days of conceiving Chatterbox, I had very much been studying supply and demand curves and thinking, no one will value refugees, or society won't value refugees entirely unless they have a dollar value. It's a shame that our society is built that way. I wish it wasn't, but it's true. So unfortunately, you know, the conversation starts with how can they be helpful to us? And when I thought about it, I realized some of the most successful refugees that I knew had gone into the languages sector. They were interpreters, they were language teachers, they were translators. Because language skills have a monetizable value, even when your degree is worth nothing anymore, as my mother's was. And actually, it's something that even Europeans do. You know, when a French kid goes to China, what do? They teach they teach French.
Absolutely.
A British kid goes and teaches English. You know, languages are an asset that you can tap into.
And there's another question I wanted to ask you, because we touched upon this when we were preparing with Kim about the length, the time frame, which also was interesting with Karam. Like, he talks about, for me, it was the lapse of time that goes into your whatever your final destination is, because you still don't know what it is. And it kind of reminds me of this beautiful movie that, if you haven't seen it, you should. It's a French movie. It's called Mayrik, which means mother in Armenian. And it's about the story of this little boy, and it's a true story, of Azad Zakarian, who turns out to be one of the biggest filmmakers in French history, Henri Verneuil. And he talks about his journey as a refugee and how he arrives at the port of Marseille, and he's waiting. And there's a scene in the movie where he describes, also in this book, because it's based from a book, where the custom person is holding the stamp, which the stamp is apatride, and he's holding it in his hand, and the film stops because the guy's holding it, because the boy, he's a boy at the time, and he says that that time lasted for so long. And I think that the conception, and maybe, I mean, I almost want to get you back on stage, Kim, but the conception of time changes when you're hoping to get to whatever final destination again is. Maybe Canada is not your ultimate final destination. Maybe you'll go somewhere else again. So in my introduction here with this question, I wanted to know, maybe you can share with us how old you were when you arrived, and how do you conceive, because I feel like, and I hope that Chatterbox is not your final destination, that, or if it is, it's going to keep expanding infinitely into other countries, so that we grasp the concept of not only time, but the difficulty of the journey that you've gone through as a person.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned journeys, because I think, you know, one of my biggest lessons building Chatterbox has been just how inspirational refugees are. You know, we use the word refugee like refugees are a different kind of human. And I don't know, it feels like we separate them out from the rest of us. Really, I feel like refugee is a very temporary state, and it happens to some people, and it affects them very badly right now when it doesn't need to. But so what refugees are ordinary, intelligent and non-intelligent, kind and mean people. You know, every kind of person under the sun is a refugee. And so it's no surprise that, you know, some of them are incredibly innovative and incredibly creative, and produce incredible pathways for themselves to re-engage in society, as I observed refugees doing into the languages sector, which is what Chatterbox is kind of broadening out to offer to more people. But what's true is that this dislocation from society happens to a lot of different people, especially in the labor market. So women who take time out of work and then want to get back into work after perhaps, you know, raising a family, they are just as disadvantaged in the labor market than a refugee coming back into it after 5 years. In different ways, for sure, but actually that insight that, refugees are an inspiration, that this pathway they've created to language teaching and language services can actually be used to help many more people, is what's happened at Chatterbox. We actually have used the Chatterbox solution to now employ women returning to work, older people who have been made redundant from industries that are declining. And so Chatterbox is an inspiration for them. And I wonder in what other ways refugees' journeys back into work can be inspiring for other people. Because guess what? A significant proportion of the audience here today will be unemployed in the next 10 years. You're going to have to be looking at new industries, new skills, new opportunities for yourself. And I tell you what, observing what the refugee community do today is the biggest inspiration you can take about what you should do tomorrow.
Thank you for that. That was good. That was powerful. Thank you. It's actually going to make me tear up. I find that what you just said is so beautiful because it's so interesting to conceive. If we take it, we go macro. Everybody here, half of the people here are talking about circular economy, and I'm not going to make some correlations to that, but there is, in a way, a correlation. I think circulation of humanity is a natural thing in the process of nature, and we have to come to terms with that. It's not normal for people to be, even if they arrive in the land that they want to be stuck, because you can arrive somewhere and be stuck, right, Karam? That can happen. You arrive in Calais and you're stuck. You cannot do anything. I feel like when you get people stuck, not only you don't use their talent, but you stop the flow of the natural circulation of life. And it goes, without being too poetic or too philosophical about it, I think it really relates to the type of economies that we're going into. And we were recycling things that are considered used and damaged and not useful. We are reusing them today. And I think that when you come from a country like Kim arrived, like Karam arrived, that has been stricken by war or stricken by poverty, that does not mean that you're useless. To the contrary, you are incredibly useful. And I think it's such a shame that, that we still would have these configurations. But looking at it from a point of love, like Kim said, we still have to honor the fear of people. And to go beyond the fear, maybe you can share with us what you do on a daily basis, because you're still going and knocking at doors and saying, hey, you want to hire a refugee system?
Well, actually, so what you've said is very true. It comes back to the topic of sustainability. And it is when we're predicting anywhere between 100 million and 1 billion refugees in the next few decades, it is unsustainable to expect them to A, stay in a country that's burning, or B, be treated as second-class citizens on their journeys or when they arrive to a place of safety. That's unnatural, that's unsustainable. Just as it's unnatural for us to kind of be sitting here sipping fizzy water while some people are dying from a lack of water, but that speaks to other things. Actually, I think, in my work, anger and injustice really fuels me. And I actually think that when I first started Chatterbox, part of it was just being really annoyed by how most people talked about refugees. I found it really infantilizing, romanticizing, and weak. It didn't do anything to talk about refugee stories again and again ad nauseum. It's why I went to the world of startups, The greatest minds in our society have paid attention to how to make people click ads, how to generate revenue. What Chatterbox as a kind of a tech for good, but a for-profit company seeks to do, is to direct that innovation, that thinking, those models towards generating social good. Because I don't care about people's sympathy, I don't care about people's heartwarming feelings toward the refugee community. I care about solutions, and I care about solutions that scale.
And that work.
And that work, exactly. So you asked about my day-to-day. My day-to-day is going to companies and saying, you have a language learning need here. Your team members want it as a benefit, or your team members need it because their English is poor or because they're moving abroad. instead of buying Rosetta Stone that has poorer results, why not buy Chatterbox?
Chatterbox?
And that is a much simpler decision for someone to take than to solve the refugee crisis
As
in
a
its
whole.
entirety. Yeah.
Well, in closing, and thank you so much for being here with me, I'm going to go back to what I had said in opening. I'm going to name a few names of game changers: Sigmund Freud, Henry Kissinger, Gloria Estefan, Bob Marley, Karam, Hassan, Mr. Mursal, Hedayat, and Kim Thuy, to the great list of refugees that are contributing greatly. And I would like to close with a quote, because I know Kim and I, we really bonded over our quotes. You know, we're writers. A quote from a great, great refugee, Freddie Mercury, who said, "I love the fact that I can make people happy in any form, even if it's just an hour of their lives. If I can make them feel good or bring a smile to a sour face, to me, that's worthwhile." I hope that's what we did today, was changing this narrative. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.